Imagine this. You're moving into a new place, excited for a fresh start, only to realize your roommate is hiding something sinister. Maybe it's a secret they don't want you to know, or maybe they're not even human. Tonight, we're counting down 10 true disturbing roommate horror stories that'll make you think twice before signing that lease. These are real stories, sent in by you, my viewers, or pulled from the darkest corners of the internet. From creepy nighttime rituals to unexplainable events that defy logic, these tales will leave you checking your locks and questioning who's really living with you. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our weekly true horror stories. Trust me, you're gonna want to stick around for this one. And if you've ever had a creepy roommate experience, drop it in the comments below. I might feature it in a future video. Grab a snack, turn off the lights, and let's get into the first story. But fair warning, these stories start unsettling and only get worse. Story 1. The Midnight Whisperer. Our first story comes from Emily, a 23-year-old college student in Columbus, Ohio. In the fall of 2021, Emily was desperate to find affordable housing near her university. After weeks of searching, she stumbled across a Craigslist ad for a 2-bedroom apartment just a few blocks from campus. The rent was almost too good to be true. $400 a month for a spacious place with big windows, hardwood floors, and a cozy fireplace. The catch: she'd be sharing it with a stranger named Sarah, a 25-year-old graphic design major who seemed shy but friendly during their brief meeting. Emily, eager to escape her cramped dorm, signed the lease without a second thought. Little did she know, she was about to step into a nightmare. The apartment was everything the ad promised. Charming, if a bit outdated, with creaky floors and a faint, musty smell. Sarah was already settled in, her room filled with art supplies, sketchbooks, and half-finished canvases. She was polite but reserved, often retreating to her room after a quick hello. Emily didn't mind. She was busy with classes and figured Sarah was just introverted. But as the first month passed, Emily started noticing things that made her skin crawl. It began with the whispers. Every night, like clockwork, Emily would wake up around 2 a.m. to soft, muffled voices drifting from Sarah's room. At first, she assumed Sarah was on the phone, maybe catching up with a friend or talking to family. But the whispers weren't casual. They were rhythmic, almost ritualistic, like a chant that rose and fell in a hypnotic cadence. The words were indistinct, but they carried a weight that made Emily's chest tighten. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself Sarah was into yoga or meditation, something harmless. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and they went on for hours, sometimes until dawn. One night, Emily couldn't take it anymore. The whispers had been particularly intense, accompanied by a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Curiosity and a growing sense of dread pulled her out of bed. She tiptoed down the hallway, her bare feet cold against the hardwood, and pressed her ear against Sarah's door. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the apartment itself was holding its breath. What she heard made her heart stutter. The words weren't English. They were guttural, jagged, like a language carved from stone. They twisted in the air, unnatural and wrong, sending a shiver down Emily's spine. Worse, the voice didn't sound like Sarah's. It was deeper, raspier, layered with a malice that made Emily's knees weak. It was as if someone, or something, else was in that room, speaking through Sarah's lips. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears, but before she could pull away, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. Then, with a slow, deliberate creak, the door began to open. Sarah stood there, her silhouette framed by the doorway. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the dim light like twin moons. Her lips curled into a smile, but it was wrong. Too wide, too sharp, like a mask stretched over something else. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her voice suddenly normal, soft, almost playful. But there was an edge to it, a knowing glint in her eyes that made Emily's stomach lurch. Emily stammered an excuse, something about needing water, and fled back to her room, slamming the door and fumbling with the lock. She didn't sleep that night, her mind racing with questions. What had she just heard? And why did Sarah's smile feel like a threat? The next morning, Sarah acted like nothing had happened. She was brewing coffee, humming a pop song, her sketchbook open to a drawing of a serene landscape. Emily tried to confront her, casually asking if she'd been up late talking to someone. Sarah just laughed, saying she'd been working on a project and must have been muttering to herself. But Emily wasn't convinced. The apartment felt different now, like the air was heavier, the shadows longer. And then she started noticing the symbols. They were everywhere once she started looking. Scratched into the furniture, carved into the bathroom mirror, even etched into the frame of her own desk. The symbols were crude, uneven, like they'd been made with a knife or a nail. They weren't random. They formed patterns, repeating in spirals and jagged lines that hurt to look at for too long. Emily asked Sarah about them, but her roommate's face went blank. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, her voice flat, her eyes avoiding Emily's. But Emily had seen Sarah's sketchbooks, and those same symbols were hidden in the margins, woven into the backgrounds of her drawings like a secret code. The tension in the apartment grew unbearable. Emily started sleeping with her door locked, a kitchen knife under her pillow. The whispers continued every night, sometimes accompanied by faint scratching, like something was clawing at the walls. She tried to research the symbols online, but found nothing concrete, just vague references to ancient rituals and forgotten languages. Her grades slipped, her friends noticed she was jumpy, and she started avoiding the apartment as much as possible. But one night, she came home late and found something that pushed her over the edge. Sarah's door was open, her room empty. The air smelled sharp, like ozone after a storm. Emily stepped inside, her heart pounding, and saw a circle of candles on the floor, their flames flickering despite the still air. In the center was a sketchbook, open to a drawing of Emily herself. Her face contorted in fear, her eyes blacked out, the symbols swirling around her like a cage. The whispers started again, not from the room, but from inside her head, low and insistent, urging her to step into the circle. She stumbled back, tripping over a candle, and the whispers stopped. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face unreadable. "You shouldn't be in here," she said, her voice cold. Emily didn't wait for an explanation. She grabbed her keys and left, spending the night at a friend's place. The next day, Emily returned with a friend to pack her things. Sarah was gone, her room stripped bare, except for a single symbol scratched into the wall, deep enough to expose the plaster underneath. When Emily went to the landlord to break the lease, he seemed unsurprised. "That apartment's always been trouble," he said, his voice low. "Sarah's been there for years, always alone. No one stays with her long? He hesitated, then added, those symbols. They were there when I bought the place. I paint over them, but they always come back. Emily moved out that week, leaving most of her furniture behind. She never saw Sarah again, but sometimes, late at night, she swears she hears those whispers, faint but unmistakable, calling her name. What was Sarah doing in that apartment? Was she possessed, or was she summoning something? And what did those symbols mean? Drop your theories in the comments, and let's see what you think. Story 2. The roommate who never left. Our second story comes from James, a 29-year-old IT technician in Seattle. In the summer of 2019, James was looking for a cheap place to live while he saved up for a house. He found a listing for a shared 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, owned by an elderly landlord who seemed eager to rent it out. The price was low, the location was perfect, and the only other tenant was a guy named Mike, a 30-something freelancer who kept to himself. James met Mike briefly before moving in, a lanky guy with a scruffy beard, always wearing the same faded gray hoodie. He seemed harmless, if a bit socially awkward, so James signed the lease and moved in. But it wasn't long before he realized Mike wasn't what he seemed. The house was old, built in the 70s, with shag carpet and wood-paneled walls that smelled faintly of mildew. Mike's room was at the end of the hall, always closed, the faint glow of a computer screen seeping under the door. He spent most of his time gaming, his muffled voice occasionally drifting through the walls as he chatted with online friends. James didn't mind. He worked long hours and valued the quiet. But about a month in, strange things started happening that made him question whether Mike was really just a quirky loner. It started with the footsteps. One night, James came home late from a work event around 11 p.m. The house was dark, the kind of dark that feels alive, pressing against your skin. Mike's door was cracked open, his room empty, the computer screen off. James assumed he was out, maybe grabbing food or meeting friends. He made himself a sandwich, watched some TV, and headed to bed. But around 3 a.m., he jolted awake to the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps pacing in the living room. Thud, 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 back and forth, slow and rhythmic, like someone was measuring the room with their steps. James lay still, his heart racing. The footsteps didn't stop. They went on for what felt like hours, never speeding up or slowing down. He grabbed his phone and texted Mike, "You home? Hearing weird noises?" No reply. The pacing continued, steady and relentless until James couldn't take it anymore. He crept to his door, pressing his ear against it. The footsteps were louder now, closer, and then a laugh, low, guttural, not quite human. It wasn't Mike's voice. James had heard him laugh before, a nervous chuckle. Nothing like this. The laugh faded, and the footsteps stopped. The house was silent again, but the silence felt wrong, like it was waiting for something. James didn't sleep that night. He kept his door locked, a baseball bat by his bed, listening for any sound. At dawn, he checked the living room. Nothing was out of place, no signs of anyone being there. Mike was back in his room, the door closed, the faint sound of his keyboard clicking. When James asked if he'd been home last night, Mike shrugged, saying he'd been out with friends and crashed at their place. But his eyes darted away, and his hands fidgeted with the hem of his hoodie. James let it go, but the incident stuck with him. The footsteps became a nightly occurrence, always at 3 a.m., always in the living room. James tried to catch them on his phone, setting up a voice recorder, but it only picked up static. He started noticing other things about Mike. His hoodie was always damp, even on dry nights, like he'd been walking through rain. Sometimes, James would catch Mike staring at him from the kitchen or the hallway, his eyes unblinking, his face blank. Once, James woke up to find Mike standing in his doorway, just watching, before turning and walking away without a word. When confronted, Mike claimed he was sleepwalking, but James wasn't so sure. James started digging into the house's history, spending late nights on his laptop, searching public records and old news articles. He found something unsettling. In 1998, a tenant named David had died in the house, found in the basement with no clear cause of death. The article included a grainy photo of David, a lanky guy with a scruffy beard, wearing a gray hoodie, his face eerily similar to Mike's. James's stomach churned. He showed the article to Mike, expecting a laugh or a denial, but Mike's face went pale. "Probably a cousin," he mumbled, but his voice shook, and he left the room quickly. James went to the landlord, an old man named Mr. Carter who lived across town. When he showed him the article, Carter's hands trembled. "That's impossible," he said. "David died here. I found him myself." He refused to say more, but as James left, Carter muttered, "Don't stay in that house too long." James returned home, his mind racing. That night, the footsteps were louder, closer, circling his bedroom door. He heard the laugh again, but this time, it was layered, like multiple voices laughing in unison. He didn't sleep, didn't move, just waited for dawn. The next day, James packed his things and moved out, crashing with a coworker until he found a new place. He tried to contact Mike, but his phone was disconnected, his social media accounts gone. It was like he'd vanished. A few weeks later, James drove by the house out of curiosity. The windows were dark, the lawn overgrown, but he swore he saw a figure in the living room, pacing back and forth, wearing a gray hoodie. He didn't stop to look closer. Later, he learned from a neighbor that the house had a reputation. Tenants often reported a man pacing at night, laughing to himself even when the house was empty. No one knew who he was or why he stayed. Was Mike a ghost, a squatter, or something else entirely? And why did he seem so real, so present, only to disappear without a trace? Let me know what you think in the comments. Story 3. The Doll Collector. Our third story comes from Rachel, a 26-year-old nurse in Jacksonville, Florida. In the spring of 2020, Rachel was working long shifts at a hospital during the early days of the pandemic. To save money, she moved in with a coworker named Claire, a 28-year-old nurse with a warm smile and a knack for baking. Claire's apartment was small but cozy, filled with handmade quilts and the smell of fresh cookies. Rachel felt lucky to have found such a kind roommate until she discovered Claire's obsession. Claire collected porcelain dolls. Her bedroom was a shrine to them. Hundreds of dolls lined up on shelves, perched on the dresser, even tucked into the corners of the room. Some were pristine, with delicate lace dresses and painted cheeks, while others were damaged, their eyes chipped or their hair matted. Rachel found them creepy, their unblinking stares following her whenever she passed Claire's open door, but she didn't want to offend her new roommate. Claire loved her dolls, talking about them like they were family, each with a name and a story. Rachel chalked it up to a quirky hobby and tried to focus on her work. But the dolls weren't just a collection. At night, Rachel started hearing strange sounds from Claire's room, soft giggles, like children playing, mixed with faint whispers. She'd lie awake, her heart pounding, trying to convince herself it was just the TV or Claire talking in her sleep. But the sounds were too clear, too deliberate. One night, she crept to Claire's door and peeked inside. Claire was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by her dolls, whispering to them as if they could hear her. "You're so pretty," she murmured to one, stroking its hair. "You'll stay with me forever." Rachel backed away, her skin crawling, and didn't mention it the next day. The incidents escalated. Rachel started finding dolls outside Claire's room, on the kitchen counter, in the bathroom, even on the couch where she'd been sitting moments before. Claire, always HUD 2.0, would apologize, saying she must have moved them in her sleep, but Rachel wasn't convinced. Then, one night, Rachel came home early from a shift and found Claire in the living room, the dolls arranged in a perfect circle around her. Claire was chanting softly, her eyes glazed over, her hands trembling as she adjusted each doll's position. When Rachel asked what she was doing, Claire's head snapped up, her face contorted with anger. "They need to be in the right order," she hissed, her voice sharp, unlike her usual gentle tone. Rachel mumbled an apology and retreated to her room, locking the door. Rachel couldn't sleep that night. She kept replaying the scene in her mind. Claire's wild eyes, the doll's unblinking stares, the way the air felt charged, like a storm was brewing. The next morning, she woke up to find a doll on her nightstand, its head tilted toward her, its painted lips curled into a smirk. Rachel's scream woke Claire, who rushed in confused, claiming she hadn't moved the doll. But Rachel noticed Claire's hands were shaking, her eyes darting to the doll as if she was afraid of it. Rachel started researching the dolls, spending her breaks at the hospital scouring online forums and antique collector sites. She found references to certain porcelain dolls being used in occult practices, their hollow bodies supposedly capable of housing spirits or energies. Some of Claire's dolls matched descriptions of these vessel dolls, many of them antiques from the 19th century, rumored to be tied to rituals that bound souls to the physical world. Rachel's unease grew, especially as Claire's behavior deteriorated. She stopped eating, her cheeks hollowing out, her skin pale. She spent all her time with the dolls, rearranging them obsessively, muttering to herself about keeping them happy. The breaking point came one night when Rachel woke to a weight on her chest. She opened her eyes and saw Claire standing over her, holding a doll that looked exactly like Rachel. Same curly brown hair, same green eyes, even the same faint scar on her cheek from a childhood accident. Claire was whispering to the doll, her voice low and reverent. "You'll stay with us forever. You're one of us now." Rachel screamed, shoving Claire away, and the doll fell to the floor, its head cracking open. Claire let out a wail, not of anger but of grief, as if she'd lost something precious. Rachel grabbed her phone and called a friend, who came to pick her up. She didn't return to the apartment until daylight, and when she did, Claire was gone. Her room empty except for a single doll, the one that looked like Rachel, sitting on the bed, its cracked head stitched back together with black thread. Rachel moved out that day, staying with a coworker until she could find a new place. She reported Claire to the hospital's HR department, citing mental health concerns. A few weeks later, she learned Claire had been admitted to a psychiatric facility, claiming the dolls were talking to her, telling her to collect more. Rachel burned the doll that looked like her, watching the flames consume it, the porcelain melting into a grotesque puddle. But even now, years later, she feels a presence sometimes, a faint giggle in the dark, a shadow in the corner of her eye. She checks her new apartment daily, searching for dolls, terrified that Claire, or something worse, is still watching her. What was Claire doing with those dolls? Was she losing her mind? Or were the dolls really vessels for something sinister? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Story 4, The Roommate in the Walls. Our fourth story comes from Alex, a 24-year-old barista in Chicago. In the winter of 2022, Alex was struggling to make ends meet, working double shifts at a coffee shop while taking night classes at a community college. When he found a cheap, one-bedroom apartment in a gritty part of town, he jumped at the chance, even though it meant sharing it with a guy named Tom. Tom was a drifter, a 30-something guy with a scruffy beard and a duffel bag that seemed to hold all his possessions. He was quiet, often gone for days, which suited Alex fine. He liked having the place to himself. But one night, he realized he wasn't alone in that apartment, and the truth was far worse than he could have imagined. The apartment was a dump, peeling wallpaper, exposed pipes, and a faint smell of mold that never went away. Tom's room was a mystery, always locked when he was gone, which was often. Alex didn't pry. He figured Tom was just private, maybe dealing with personal stuff. But about 6 weeks in, Alex started hearing noises that made him question whether Tom was the only other person in the apartment. It began with the scratching. Every night, around midnight, Alex would hear it, soft at first, then louder, more insistent, coming from the walls. It wasn't random, like a mouse or a pipe. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone was carving a message. Alex tried to ignore it, telling himself old buildings have pests. But the scratching followed a pattern, starting in the living room and moving toward his bedroom, as if it was tracking him. He mentioned it to Tom one morning, hoping for an explanation, but Tom just shrugged, his eyes avoiding Alex's. "Old places make weird noises," he said, his voice flat. But Alex noticed Tom's hands were bandaged, the gauze stained with something dark. One night, when Tom was gone for one of his mysterious trips, Alex decided to investigate. He waited until midnight when the scratching started and followed the sound to the living room wall, where it was loudest. He pressed his ear against the plaster, the cold seeping into his skin. The scratching was clear, almost urgent, like it was trying to get out. Alex tapped on the wall, a nervous test, and the scratching stopped. The silence was suffocating. Then from inside the wall came a response. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Alex's breath caught in his throat. He tapped again, harder, and the knocks came back, louder, more forceful, like a challenge. Alex tore apart the apartment, checking for pipes, vents, anything that could explain the noise. He found nothing, no rodents, no loose wiring, just the scratches, deeper than he'd realized, etched into the drywall like a map. He started researching the building's history, spending hours in the library, combing through microfiche and online archives. He found a chilling article from 1987. A tenant named Michael, a reclusive artist, had vanished from the apartment, leaving behind a room full of abstract sculptures made of bone and wire. The landlord at the time, a shady figure named Victor, had been investigated for renting out unsafe units, but no charges stuck. Michael was never found, and his case went cold. Alex confronted Tom when he returned, showing him the article. Tom's face hardened, his jaw clenching. "Don't mess with the walls," he snapped, his voice low, almost a growl. Alex backed off, but that night, he noticed something he hadn't before. A small, rusted door in Tom's room, hidden behind a bookshelf, barely visible in the dim light. It was padlocked, the metal corroded, but the lock looked new, shiny, out of place. Alex's curiosity burned, but so did his fear. He waited until Tom left again, then grabbed a crowbar from the coffee shop's storage room and pried the door open. The door led to a crawl space, narrow and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth and decay. The walls were covered in scratch marks, some fresh, some crusted with old blood. At the far end, Alex found a sleeping bag, a flashlight, and a notebook, its pages filled with frantic handwriting. "They're watching. They never leave. I can't stop scratching." The final entry was dated that week, in a different hand, as if someone else had written it. "He's next." Alex's hands shook as he snapped photos with his phone, his breath shallow. He stumbled out of the crawl space, locking the door behind him, and called the landlord, a gruff man named Sal, who seemed unsurprised. "Some tenants get creative," Sal said, but his voice was uneasy. "Best not to poke around." Alex moved out the next day, crashing with a coworker until he could afford a new place. He sent the photos to the police, who searched the apartment but found no sign of Tom. The crawl space was empty, the notebook gone, the scratches painted over. Sal claimed Tom had skipped town, leaving no forwarding address. But Alex learned from a neighbor that the apartment had a history. Tenants often reported scratching noises, shadows in the walls, even voices whispering their names. Some said Michael, the missing artist, had never left, his spirit, or something worse, trapped in the building. Alex still checks his walls every night, listening for scratches, terrified that whatever was in that crawl space followed him. Who, or what, was living in those walls? Was Tom involved, or was he a victim too? Let me know your theories in the comments. Story 5. The roommate who watched our fifth story comes from Mia, a 21-year-old student in Austin, Texas. In the fall of 2023, Mia was starting her junior year at UT Austin, majoring in psychology and juggling a part-time job at a bookstore. To cut costs, she moved in with a girl named Lauren, a 23-year-old computer science major she met through a campus housing group. Lauren was bubbly, tech-savvy, and a little too eager to be friends, always asking Mia about her classes, her family, her dating life. Mia thought it was just her way of bonding, but soon she realized Lauren's curiosity wasn't innocent. It was an obsession. The apartment was nice, high ceilings, lots of light, and fast Wi-Fi, courtesy of Lauren's tech setup. Lauren was always tinkering with her laptop, coding late into the night, her room a jungle of monitors and cables. Mia didn't mind. She was busy with school and appreciated Lauren's knack for fixing tech issues. But about a month in, Mia started feeling uneasy, like she was being watched. She'd be in her room, reading or watching Netflix, and feel eyes on her, a prickling at the back of her neck. She'd check the windows, the doors, even the closets, but found nothing. The feeling grew stronger, more oppressive, until it was hard to focus. One day, Lauren left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she ran to class. Mia needed to print a paper and, with Lauren's permission, used the laptop. As she navigated to the printer settings, she noticed a folder on the desktop labeled M-Clips. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she clicked it open. Inside were hundreds of video files, each labeled with a date and time, some as recent as that morning. Mia's heart pounded as she double-clicked one, her hands trembling. the screen filled with grainy footage of her bedroom, shot from above her bed, showing her sleeping, unaware, her face pale in the moonlight. Mia's stomach dropped. She clicked another file, footage of her studying at her desk. Another showed her changing after a shower, the camera hidden somewhere in the bathroom. The angles suggested cameras in the ceiling vents, the smoke detector, even the bookshelf. Mia's hands shook as she searched the apartment, her breath shallow. She found the first camera in her bedroom vent, a tiny lens no bigger than a penny, its red light blinking like an eye. She tore it out, the wires dangling, and found others, 6 in total, hidden in every room, even the living room where she and Lauren watched movies together. Mia confronted Lauren that night, holding up the cameras, her voice shaking with anger and fear. Lauren's face went pale, her eyes wide, but she didn't deny it. "They're for security," she said, her voice small. "I was worried about break-ins." But her excuses unraveled. Why record Mia's private moments? Why save the files? Lauren broke down, sobbing, claiming she needed to know. Mia was safe, but her tears felt rehearsed, her story flimsy. Mia packed a bag and left, staying with a friend, and reported Lauren to campus police the next day. The police searched Lauren's apartment and found more than cameras. Her hard drive contained files on dozens of former roommates, some dating back 5 years, all women, all filmed without consent. Some videos had been uploaded to dark websites, sold to anonymous buyers for thousands. Lauren was arrested, charged with multiple counts of invasion of privacy, but she disappeared before her court date, her whereabouts unknown. Mia moved to a new apartment, but a week later she found a note slipped under her door, written in Lauren's neat handwriting. "You were my favorite." Mia burned the note, but she still checks her vents every night, terrified that Lauren or one of her buyers is still watching. How far did Lauren's network go? Was she acting alone, or was she part of something bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Story 6. The Roommate Who Cooked. Our sixth story comes from Daniel, a 27-year-old mechanic in Portland, Oregon. In the summer of 2021, Daniel was looking for a fresh start after a rough breakup. He found a 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town, owned by a landlord who didn't ask too many questions. His roommate was Chris, a 32-year-old chef with a passion for cooking. Chris was charismatic, always whipping up elaborate meals. Roasted lamb, spicy curries, dishes Daniel couldn't pronounce but loved to eat. Daniel thought he'd hit the jackpot until he discovered what Chris was really cooking. The house was modest but comfortable, with a big kitchen that Chris treated like a temple. He'd spend hours there, humming to himself, experimenting with recipes he claimed he'd learned from all over the world. His food was incredible, rich and complex, with flavors Daniel had never tasted. But about 2 months in, Daniel started noticing things that made his stomach turn, not from the food, but from suspicion. It started with the smells. Every night, Chris would cook something that smelled off, not spoiled, but metallic, earthy, like something primal. Daniel asked about it, curious, and Chris said it was game meat from a local butcher who specialized in exotic cuts, venison, boar, maybe ostrich. Daniel nodded, impressed, but noticed the fridge was always empty, no packages of meat, no butcher's paper. Chris never brought home groceries, yet the kitchen was always stocked. Daniel tried to laugh it off. Maybe Chris had a hookup, a supplier who delivered late. But one night, he came home early and saw something that shattered his trust. Chris didn't hear Daniel come in. He was focused, his knife moving with surgical precision, slicing through a slab of meat that didn't look like beef or pork. It was pale, almost translucent, with veins that seemed to pulse under the fluorescent light. Daniel cleared his throat, and Chris froze, his head snapping up, his eyes wild, like a predator caught mid-hunt. "You're home early," Chris said, his voice tight, forcing a smile. He quickly covered the meat with a towel, but not before Daniel saw the blood pooling on the counter, thick and dark. Daniel mumbled something about being tired and retreated to his room, his appetite gone. The next day, Daniel found a locked cooler in the garage, hidden behind a stack of old tires. It was heavy, rusted, and leaking a foul liquid that smelled like the kitchen on those strange nights. He didn't dare open it, but the sight of it made his skin crawl. He started researching, checking local news for anything suspicious. He found articles about a string of missing persons in Portland, dozens over the past year, more than the city's usual crime rate. Some had last been seen in their neighborhood, near a bar Chris frequented. Daniel's mind raced, connecting dots he didn't want to see. Daniel confronted Chris, asking about the cooler, the meat, the smells. Chris laughed, his charm back in place, saying it was just bulk cuts he got on the cheap. But his eyes were cold, his hands fidgeting with the knife he always carried. Daniel didn't push further. He started eating out, avoiding Chris's meals. But the memory of those flavors haunted him. Rich, metallic, unlike anything he'd eaten before. One night, he woke to the sound of the cooler being dragged across the garage floor, the scraping loud in the silence. He peered out his window and saw Chris loading it into a van, his face illuminated by the streetlight, his expression blank. Daniel moved out the next week, staying with a friend until he could afford a new place. He tipped off the police, who searched the house and found the cooler. Empty, scrubbed clean, but with traces of human DNA in the seams. Chris vanished before they could question him, leaving no trace, no ID, no records, nothing. The police found knives in his room, some with residue that matched the DNA in the cooler. Daniel still dreams of those meals, the taste lingering on his tongue, a sickening reminder of what he might have eaten. He avoids meat now, terrified of that metallic flavor. What was Chris cooking? Was he a lone predator or part of something darker? Drop your theories in the comments. Story 7. The Roommate Who Sang. Our seventh story comes from Sophie, a 25-year-old teacher in Brooklyn, New York. In the fall of 2020, Sophie was starting her first teaching job at a public school, excited but overwhelmed. To afford the city's high rent, she moved in with Hannah, a 24-year-old music student she found through a roommate app. Hannah was talented, her voice ethereal, like something from another world. She practiced constantly, filling the apartment with haunting melodies. But Hannah only sang at night, in a language Sophie didn't recognize. And when she did, the apartment felt alive, as if the walls were listening. The apartment was a pre-war walk-up, with high ceilings and creaky floors that groaned underfoot. Hannah's room was a shrine to music, guitars, a keyboard, stacks of composition books filled with lyrics and chords. Her voice was her gift, capable of bringing tears or chills, depending on the song. Sophie loved listening to her practice, but Hannah's nighttime singing was different. Darker, more intense, the notes weaving a spell that made the air hum. Sophie asked about the language once, and Hannah smiled, saying it was an old dialect she'd learned for a project. But the songs didn't feel like a project. They felt like a ritual. Sophie started having dreams, vivid, terrifying visions of a woman in white, her face blurred, singing the same melody Hannah did. The woman's voice was beautiful but wrong, her mouth stretching too wide, her eyes hollow. Sophie would wake up drenched in sweat, the melody lingering in her mind, impossible to shake. She mentioned the dreams to Hannah, hoping for a laugh or an explanation, but Hannah's face went still. "It's just a folk song," she said, her voice tight. "Don't think about it too much." But the dreams grew worse, and Sophie started sleepwalking, waking up outside Hannah's door, her lips moving, humming that same tune. One night, Sophie set up her phone to record Hannah's singing, determined to identify the language. She hid it in the living room, the mic sensitive enough to catch every note. When she played it back the next day, her blood ran cold. There were two voices, Hannah's, clear and soaring, and another, deeper, layered beneath it, like a shadow singing in unison. The second voice was guttural, almost animalistic, its notes discordant yet perfectly aligned with Hannah's. Sophie confronted Hannah, playing the recording, her hands shaking, Hannah's face drained of color, her eyes wide with fear. "Delete it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not safe." Sophie didn't delete it. Not yet. She copied the file to her laptop, then hid the phone. That night, she woke to Hannah standing over her, singing softly, her eyes completely white, like twin moons in the dark. The melody was louder now, inside Sophie's head, urging her to join, to sing. Sophie screamed, and Hannah blinked, her eyes normal again, her face confused. "I was sleepwalking," she said, but her voice shook. Sophie packed a bag and left, staying with a colleague, but the melody followed her, faint but persistent, humming in her dreams. Sophie researched the song, digging through musicology forms and old texts. She found references to a myth about a spirit that sings through humans, using their voices to lure others, binding them to its will. The song was said to be a trap, its notes a chain that never breaks. Sophie deleted the recording, burning the phone's SD card for good measure. But she still hears the melody sometimes, faint in the subway's hum or the wind's whisper. She avoids music now, terrified of that voice calling her back. Was Hannah possessed, or was she channeling something ancient? Is the song still out there, waiting for its next voice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Story 8. The roommate who counted our 8th story comes from Liam, a 30-year-old writer in Los Angeles, California. In the spring of 2022, Liam was working on his first novel, a psychological thriller, and needed a quiet place to focus. He found a 2-bedroom apartment in a quirky neighborhood, sharing it with Ethan, a 27-year-old math grad student with a nervous laugh and a habit of muttering numbers under his breath. Ethan seemed harmless, if a bit eccentric, but Liam soon realized Ethan's obsession with numbers wasn't just a quirk. It was a gateway to something terrifying. The apartment was modern, with big windows and a view of the city skyline. Ethan's room was a chaos of papers, calculators, and sticky notes plastered with formulas. He'd tap his fingers constantly, always in patterns. 3 taps, pause, 5 taps, pause, repeat. Liam found it annoying but endearing, assuming it was just Ethan's way of thinking. But at night, Ethan's habits took a darker turn, one that made Liam question his roommate's sanity and his own. It started with the counting. Every night around 2 a.m., Liam would hear Ethan pacing the living room, counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 67, 68. The numbers climbed higher, sometimes into the thousands, Ethan's voice growing frantic, almost desperate. Liam tried to ignore it, burying his head under a pillow. But the counting was relentless, seeping into his dreams. He asked Ethan about it one morning, and Ethan grinned, his eyes bright. "I'm tracking patterns," he said. "The numbers hold the truth." Liam nodded, unsure, but noticed Ethan's hands were raw, his nails bitten to the quick, as if he'd been scratching at something. The counting grew louder, more obsessive, and Ethan started writing numbers everywhere. On the walls, the fridge, the bathroom mirror. They weren't random. They formed sequences, spirals, equations that seemed to pulse with intent. Liam tried to clean them off, but Ethan would rewrite them, his face contorted with anger. "They need to stay," he shouted once, his voice cracking. Liam started locking his door at night, the numbers creeping into his mind, making his head throb. One night, he woke to Ethan standing in his room, counting backward from a 100, his eyes fixed on Liam. When he reached 0, he stopped, smiled, and said, "It's your turn." Liam laughed it off, his heart racing. But the next morning, he found a note under his pillow. "Count with me." The handwriting was Ethan's, but the ink was red, smudged like blood. Ethan's behavior spiraled. He stopped eating, his skin gray, his eyes sunken. He'd sit in the living room, rocking back and forth, muttering numbers like a prayer. Liam started feeling dizzy, the numbers crawling into his thoughts, making his novel's pages fill with equations instead of words. He researched Ethan's work, finding his thesis on living algorithms, patterns that could think and act. The final chapter was missing, replaced with a single line, "The numbers are alive." Liam moved out, staying with a friend, but the numbers followed him, faint in the hum of traffic or the tick of a clock. He learned Ethan had been hospitalized, strapped to a bed, screaming about numbers that spoke to him, telling him to count down to the end. Liam burned Ethan's note, but he still hears tapping sometimes. 3 taps, pause, 5 taps, pause. Like Ethan's still counting, waiting for Liam to join. He avoids math now, terrified of what the numbers might say. Are the numbers really alive? Or was Ethan lost in his own mind? What was he counting down to? Drop your theories in the comments. Story 9. The roommate who painted our 9th story comes from Olivia, a 22-year-old artist in Savannah, Georgia. In the fall of 2021, Olivia was studying at an art school, dreaming of her first gallery show. To save money, she moved in with Zoe, a 26-year-old painter whose work was dark, visceral, and breathtaking. Zoe's canvases were abstract, filled with jagged shapes and deep reds, their energy almost alive. Olivia admired her talent, even envied it. But soon, she realized Zoe's art wasn't just paint. It was something far more sinister. The apartment was a loft, with exposed brick and tall windows that let in moody light, perfect for painting. Zoe's room was a fortress, always locked, her canvases hidden until they were finished. Olivia respected her privacy, but at night, she'd hear Zoe working, muttering, sometimes sobbing, the air heavy with the smell of paint and something sharper like blood. Olivia tried to bond with Zoe, asking about her process, but Zoe was guarded, her smiles tight. "Art demands sacrifice," she'd say, her eyes distant. Olivia nodded, assuming she meant time or effort, but Zoe's words carried a weight that lingered. One night, Olivia couldn't sleep. the air thick with that sharp smell. She crept to Zoe's door and peered through the keyhole, her breath shallow. Zoe was painting with her hands, smearing thick red liquid across a canvas, her movements frantic, almost possessed. The liquid didn't move like paint. It was viscous, clotting in places, dripping like blood. Olivia's heart pounded, but before she could move, Zoe's head turned, her eyes locking on the door, as if she sensed her. Olivia fled to her room, locking the door, her mind racing. The next morning, Zoe's hands were bandaged, her face pale, and the canvas was gone, the studio scrubbed clean. Olivia started finding red stains around the apartment, on the sink, the floor, even her own sketchbook, smudged into her drawings. Zoe claimed it was just paint, but the smell was unmistakable, metallic and raw. Olivia's paintings began to change, her colors darkening, her lines jagged, as if Zoe's influence was seeping into her work. One night, she woke to Zoe in the living room, painting a massive canvas, its surface a grotesque image of Olivia's face, screaming, her eyes bleeding red. Zoe was whispering, "It's almost finished," her voice reverent, her hands dripping. Olivia screamed, and Zoe blinked, confused, as if waking from a trance. Olivia moved out the next day, but not before stealing one of Zoe's sketches, a figure painting with its own blood, surrounded by faces, all women, all eerily familiar. She researched Zoe's past, finding missing persons reports linked to her former addresses, women who vanished after living with her. Olivia reported Zoe to the police, but when they searched the loft, Zoe was gone, her canvases left behind, each one a nightmare of faces and blood. Olivia swears the faces in those paintings watched her as she left, their eyes following her. She burned the sketch, but sometimes she feels Zoe's presence, a brush stroke in the dark waiting to finish her portrait. What was Zoe painting with? Was she a killer? Or was her art something supernatural? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Story 10. The roommate who wasn't there. Our final story comes from Mark, a 28-year-old engineer in Boston, Massachusetts. In the spring of 2023, Mark landed a job at a tech startup and moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a historic brownstone, excited to live alone for the first time. The place was perfect, high ceilings, bay windows, and a quiet charm that felt like home. But from the first night, Mark felt a presence, a weight in the air, like someone was watching him. Then he started seeing her, and his dream apartment became a nightmare. The apartment was old, built in the 1890s, with creaky floors and ornate molding that hinted at its past. Mark loved its character, but the air felt charged, like the walls held secrets. The first night, he woke to a faint hum, like someone singing softly, but the apartment was empty. He checked every room, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark, but found nothing. The next night, it happened again. Whispers, footsteps, the sense of eyes on him. By the third night, she appeared. Her name was Anna, or so she said. She was sitting on the couch when Mark came home, a woman in her 20s, with long dark hair and a white dress that seemed to glow. She smiled, her eyes too bright, her voice warm. "I've been here a while," she said, as if it was normal, as if she belonged. Mark thought he was dreaming, but she was solid, real, offering him a glass of wine, chatting about the city. She was charming, almost magnetic, but something was off. Her smile was too wide, her movements too fluid, like she wasn't bound by gravity. Anna became a fixture, appearing every night, cooking meals, leaving notes in neat cursive. "Enjoy dinner," or see you tonight. Mark tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was a neighbor, sneaking in. But the locks were secure, the windows sealed. He asked the landlord, a gruff woman named Mrs. Doyle, about past tenants. Her face tightened. No one named Anna, she said, but her hands shook. Mark dug deeper, finding a 2013 article about a woman named Elizabeth, a tenant who died in the apartment, her body undiscovered for weeks. Her photo didn't match Anna's face, but the details were chilling. She'd been a recluse, found in the living room, her death ruled undetermined. Anna's demeanor changed when Mark confronted her, showing her the article. Her smile vanished, her eyes cold. I'm not her, she said, her voice sharp. But the air grew heavy, the lights flickering. Objects started moving, keys sliding across the counter, books falling from shelves. Anna's voice turned icy, whispering in the dark. You can't leave me. One night, Mark woke to her sitting on his chest, her face inches from his, her eyes black voids, her breath cold as ice. He screamed and she vanished. The room still, but the air crackled with her presence. Mark moved out the next day, staying with a coworker, then relocating across the country. He sold most of his things, unable to shake the feeling that Anna was tied to them. But she followed him, her face in reflections, her voice in the wind, whispering, I'm still here. Mark sees a therapist now who calls it PTSD, but he knows better. Anna wasn't a ghost. She was something else, something that claimed his apartment, and maybe him. He checks mirrors daily, terrified of her smile, her promise to stay. Was Anna a spirit, a demon, or something we can't name? Is she still in that apartment, waiting for the next tenant? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And there you have it, guys. 10 true, disturbing roommate horror stories that'll make you rethink who you're sharing your space with. These stories are a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. They're the people living just down the hall. Which story hit you the hardest? For me, it's that crawl space in story 4. Those scratches still give me chills. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've got your own roommate horror story, share it. I might feature it in a future video. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and hit subscribe if you haven't already. We drop new true horror stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Follow me on insert social media for behind-the-scenes stuff, and check out our Patreon for exclusive content and early access to videos. Until next time, stay safe, lock your doors, and maybe do a background check on your roommate. Good night.